Hitchens, David Burrows. Peter Hitchens, Russell Brand says this is a disorder. We should treat drug addiction like a disease. Do you agree?
No, it's a crime. It involves the possession of a Class A drug, which is a criminal offence, which people do voluntarily and they do it for pleasure. And if we continue to treat it as if it is a disease which they should be sympathised with, there will be more and more and more of it, as there has been over the past many years. We do not anymore enforce our own laws on this subject. The very word addiction assumes that the person involved has no free will.
You have no sympathy at all for the people who get trapped on drugs for years on end?
Well, I have sympathy with anybody who gets themselves into trouble, but sympathy isn't the point. What I don't have is any sympathy with somebody who deliberately breaks a known law. They are criminals. They should be punished. And honestly, if they were punished for this, they would, by and large, not get into the trouble they get into, and there would be many, many fewer of them. But we don't do that. You can look at the figures for arrests of people, even for possession of Class A drugs, which we supposedly view most seriously. Of the ones who are convicted, fewer than 1 in 10 are actually sentenced to imprisonment. This is a Class A drug, the most serious.
Russell Brand, they are criminals. What's wrong with what?
I understand what Peter's saying, and I understand his frustration. As a person that has to deal with drug addicts in my life, they're a frustrating type of person to deal with. But I think, Peter, that if you can find in yourself to look at human beings with compassion and love, rather than with aggression, you'll find that there's more of an opportunity for progress. I know it's annoying.
Well, I don't wish to be lectured on aggression by you. You've been extremely aggressive to me in the past when we've met.
That's just because of the bigotry, Peter. I don't mean it. I'm only having a bit of fun because of the Daily Mail stuff and that.
When you actually learn to use reason, you can accuse people of bigotry. Until then, I should keep very quiet about it. Learn to use some reason in this matter. Why is a comedian being given a programme on the BBC to push a policy about drugs?
Because he has first-hand experience of drugs.
Why is our debate on drugs so debased that this is the kind of thing we are reduced to?
Peter, why are you so angry? What happened to you, mate?
I'm angry because many young people in this country are being betrayed.
What do you think we should do?
By a feeble government and a feeblest...
What do you think we should do, Peter?
I think we should enforce our law against illegal drugs.
More people in prison?
I don't want people in prison, no. I want people deterred from taking drugs which will ruin their lives by punishment.
I want that. I don't think people should take drugs.
You ask a question, you better listen to the answer. I want them deterred by effective policing. Listen to what I'm saying, you'll learn something.
I've heard it before, Peter.
Well, you plainly weren't listening that time either.
I don't even think you're ignorant. I just think you're innocent.
Policing.
You're like a peculiar child.
You see, ad hominem and interruption, absolutely nothing remotely resembling reason, thought, or fact. And yet you are making a programme on drugs for the BBC, and I am not. And that is exactly what is wrong.
Let's bring in one of the people. Let's bring in one of the people who's in the film, who is qualified to be in the film. Should someone who's qualified to be in the film, he's someone who got Russell Brand and many other people clean on drugs. What do you think is the answer?
What do I think it what?
What do you think is the answer? What do you think? Is it compassion? Is it locking up?
Well, they're very simplistic terms, compassion, locking up. I think...
Making it legal?
Of course, everybody who takes Class A drugs is committing a crime. But people do it, and people do it because it is pleasurable to begin with, and then they become addicted. And I think at that point you need to intervene in a kind and compassionate way. Nobody sets out to become highly addicted to drugs.
It is a disease. We should treat it as a disease, as a disorder?
I don't know whether it's a disease or an illness. All I know is that everybody who walks through the door of my treatment centre did not intend to end up that way. They started off with perhaps good intentions, but they did not intend to end up the way. It crept up on them, and they became very ill and very sick, and those people need help, and we try and give it to them.
They'd have been better off if they'd been deterred from doing it in the first place, which is what we do not do.
And we don't do it with alcohol either.
Instead, the government mugs the taxpayer to the tune of £300 million a year to give drugs to people who are already on drugs.
David Burrows, that was something that I thought was shocking to find out, that nearly 150,000 people are prescribed methadone in this country. You know, should we be actually giving drugs to people and just sort of trying to keep them off the street rather than helping them kick their addiction, which is basically what Russell Brand said?
If we want to be caring, it's not caring just to simply give them methadone to park themselves up on methadone. And this government has recognised that this big tanker that's been throwing a whole lot of money into 300,000 on that tanker hasn't had a destination. It's been going around just giving them methadone, keeping them in the treatment, and not actually giving them an exit. And
there's not much. You've been in power for 2 years. There's not much sign that it's changing.
Well, 18% more people have come out drug-free in the last year, and now we're going to be paying people in areas to provide rehab and opportunities to get off drugs, and also to be get back into society again, into employment, into proper housing, and with that to pay them by the results, not just to pay them to get into treatment, but to get out of it into society again.
Truth is the government is going to end up using methadone because it's cheap, surely. That is why.
Well, it's not actually cheap in the long run to be years and years in methadone. We're now getting geri addicts who've been on methadone for so many years. It makes sense for the addict and for those around them to get them off as soon as possible.
The truth is the law-abiding public are punished by the government through very heavy taxation for this ridiculous programme. Because the government is not prepared to punish people for breaking the law on drugs, which, if they enforced, would prevent an awful lot of people following the road which Chip has described.
And cost a lot more money as well, though, surely.
Well,
your approach would actually, a real war on drugs by your terms would cost a lot of money.
It wouldn't cost it endlessly. What we have done is committed ourselves to an endless programme, as I say, of mugging the public to give methadone to people who are already on drugs, which has over the past 40 years produced a gigantic increase in the number of people taking heroin and cocaine.
From Victorian Britain.
But Russell's one of the lucky...
Victorian Pete, he's a fantastic fellow.
Well, we know that the Tory party, as we know, is a soppy Liberal party, so that's no surprise.
There's nothing easy and soppy by getting off drugs. Now, Russell is one of the lucky ones. Russell is one of the lucky ones who can come here and tell his story, and we want other people to hear that story. But the reality is that the access to rehab that Chip offers and others isn't enough. It's not around the country. We want to ensure that there's more people who will be able to access that treatment and tell that story. Whatever you think of Russell, it's a good story to tell.
And some of the most inspirational people.
In terms of the Olympics, some of the most inspirational people that you can hear about are those who have got through the throes of addiction and have managed to recover.
Who's telling the story of the parent of the young person who's in danger of becoming a drug user, who gets no help or deterrence from the government? Who's telling the story of the taxpayer who has to finance this failed, endless project? Nobody is telling that story, but he goes on television to tell the story from the sympathetic point of view. Let's be sorry for drug takers.
I never thought I'd be saying this on this programme, but I think Russell Brand should get a word in.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Peter, I think we want the same thing. I don't think any of us are saying that children should be taking drugs or anyone should be taking drugs. I think what we want to offer is a sensible solution to a difficult problem, and criminalisation and imprisonment isn't working. It's wonderful to hear this gentleman from the Tory party talking in such compassionate terms. I understand your frustration, mate, but I really think that the techniques and methods that you're talking about are antiquated and belong in another era. That kind of foghorn madness from bygone times is not going to help anybody.
There you go again. No reason, just abuse. I'd love to see the embrace between you and the Conservative Party. The more of it, the better. The more people will realise how useless the Conservative Party is to people in this country who care about these things. But the fact is, your policy has been tried. Wait a minute, I'm finishing my sentence. Your policy has been tried. It's been tried for 40 years, and what we see now is the consequence of it. What we see is a large number of drug takers, far greater than 40 years ago. The policy has been applied of decriminalising drugs in all but name. This country would decriminalise drugs if it were not for the fact that it has signed international treaties preventing it from doing so. The decriminalisation is unofficial, but it is there. And we have the result of what you're calling for, and it is terrible. It's time we had a change.
Would you be better off if you'd been sent to prison at the right time?
It would have been of much assistance, generally speaking, Stephanie.
Well, you talk about abstinence. That is one way of approaching abstinence.
I think that perhaps abstinence programmes in prisons is certainly one of the things that we should be looking at. I think that the penal system is one of the areas where there's vast room for improvement. I think it's a mentality shift, and perhaps that's why Peter thinks it sounds vague, because what we're talking about is quite broad. It's an attitudinal shift. Regarding it as a health problem as opposed to a criminal problem is the first step. I certainly don't think prison would have helped, although many people would argue that.
Peter, do you think it would have helped Russell Brand to go to prison?
It would have helped him if he'd been afraid of going to prison enough not to take the drugs in the first place. That's what a deterrent law does. It's not designed to throw everybody who takes drugs into prison. It's designed to deter people from taking them in the first place.
But in order to deter them, you have to send them to prison. Would he be better off?
You have to send some people to prison to prove that you mean it. Once you've done that, then they believe you. But if you stop sending people to prison, as we've done, they know you don't mean it, and they know that the criminal justice system is cardboard.
We shouldn't be tolerating drugs use, but at the same time, once we've got them in the system, in prison, we should be making sure they get rehab as well. And that's what we're trying to do, to make sure we don't just throw them methadone.
Then why are the prisons
try and make sure they get into recovery systems?
Why are the prisons that you run full of drugs then? Because they are. You make no serious effort to keep drugs.
Isn't there a problem that you all have, or at least that I think that both, actually Peter Hitchens and Russell Brand both have, which is that people don't care about drug addicts. People don't want to spend a lot of money on them. They want the cheapest possible policy, and they want them away somewhere
Yeah, they don't vote. They're a little bit of a nuisance. I understand.
Isn't that a problem for your policy as well, that people don't care enough about drug addicts even to put them in prison?
No, I don't think it's a problem at all. I think people do care a great deal, especially when this drug problem enters their own family sphere and the disaster of drugs attacks your own family and circle. People to whom this happens are so devastated that they wonder where the government is.
We haven't got much time, but just on my point, do you think that people don't care enough about drug addicts? That's basically the
Yes,
point.
I think that's basically the problem. Although I have learned to love you, Peter, and in a minute I'm going to give you such a kiss on the lips, I'm going to challenge a few other of your prejudices.
Oh, my dear chap.
Let's get into the homophobia. It's just under the surface there. Peter, I think you're a lovely man.
How does one deal?
I think you're a Harry Enfield character.
How does one deal with a person who cannot debate seriously? Why is this person brought before select committees and allowed to make programmes on the BBC? He simply isn't capable of doing it.
There's more debate
He just doesn't know how to debate. For instance, he uses this expression criminalisation. The person who criminalises is the person who commits the criminal offence. People are not criminalised. Otherwise, all you're saying is that all crime is caused by law.
No,
it's a ludicrous proposition. People commit crimes and they are punished.
I think
for
the last word, an awful lot of words have gone to Peter Hitchens. The last word to Russell Brand.
That was the idea.
You admit it now.
I think he's quite a lovely fella deep down, and he's just a little bit confused. We're not saying, of course, that the law should entitle people to act in a madcap, ad hoc fashion. We're just saying that if a social problem like drug addiction and alcoholism exists, there should be the proper, responsible, conscientious treatment. There are gentlemen like Chip Summers who understand how abstinence-based recovery works. My job is simply to draw attention to abstinence-based recovery. That's all I want to do, and a component of that is a tolerance and understanding to people unwell. This affects people's lives all over our country, and we have to approach it with benevolence.
Russell Brand's documentary is going to be